Hello there, this is Dan, and you're about to listen to an extract from an episode of the Lee Cushing podcast. Unfortunately, our homepage at noisybark.com is no longer online, but we hope to have a new homepage set up soon. Watch for updates on Facebook and Twitter under @LeeCushingPod. In the meantime, stick with our home on YouTube, Ambidextrous Solutions Limited, to hear more extracts like this one. The presenters are Howard and myself, and the music is by Greg Hume. The film was a huge success, as you just suggested, and very quickly they produced follow-up movies in terms of more films in the same style, usually with Cushing and Lee, like Dracula was the next one and The Mummy. But they also very quickly made a full sequel to The Curse of Frankenstein called The Revenge of Frankenstein, in which the returning star is not the creature played by Lee, but the creator played by Cushing. No spoilers, but the fate which awaits him at the end of The Curse of Frankenstein doesn't seem to quite take. And he relocates, changes his name ingeniously, I think, to Dr. Stein.
That's very good.
And creates a new creature. And ironically, although I'm sure Christopher Lee didn't mind in the long run, but the creature in the second film is a much more Mary Shelley-esque complex creature. He does actually succeed in creating a perfect man who is like a gentleman, but because it's a horror film, for some reason the creature, this time played by Michael Gwynn, quickly starts to revert to bestial ways and begins to physically decompose, and the film becomes a race to stop the creature and a race for the local authorities who've discovered what Frankenstein's doing to track him down as well. Again, it's written by Jimmy Sangster and pretty much reunites the entire team from The Curse of Frankenstein.
It's a while since I've seen The Revenge of Frankenstein. I don't remember it very well. I do remember there's a couple of comedy gravediggers, isn't there, with Lionel Jeffries?
Yes.
And Michael Ripper. And that's what I mean, there wasn't quite that sort of humour in The Curse of Frankenstein. No. It's like they've sort of introduced it a bit more.
And as a result, I think the film does have a little bit less bite than the original, but it does introduce a more confident all-round cast and a more kind of playful approach to the material. You know, the supporting cast in Revenge of Frankenstein includes Francis Matthews, who's a great kind of second leading man as Frankenstein's assistant, and the female lead is Eunice Gayson, James Bond's first ever girlfriend. Yes. And one of the only women in James Bond films to recur in more than one film, I think. And she's really rather good. And Gwyn is fantastic as the creature in that.
He's a very good actor.
So it's to my mind, it's not got quite the power of the original, but it's still a good film and maybe a more thoughtful film than the original is. Then we have The Evil of Frankenstein a few years later, 1964, I think.
Yes.
There was this period in the early 60s where Hammer had been hit by the censors a bit and had to pull back on their gothic output and their gruesome output. So they abandoned the Dracula and Frankenstein films for a little while, and by the time they came around to wanting to make a third Frankenstein film, they'd struck a deal with Universal whereby they could make reference to the visuals and the style of the Universal Frankenstein films. So the creature in the third film is very much based on the Karloffian archetype, with the bolts in its neck and the square head.
Well, this is the film where it looks like Baron Frankenstein has made his monster out of paper mache.
Yes.
He looks like he's covered in old newspapers. From a distance, it looks like he's got a shoebox on his head, and because it's not Karloff. No. And the guy playing him, Kiwi Kingston, who I think he was an Australian wrestler. Yeah. So not quite in the same league as Boris Karloff when it comes to acting. And it's a strange film, this, because, first of all, Peter Cushing's character is more sympathetic in this. Slightly more sympathetic. And it's the hypnotist, Zoltan the hypnotist, Peter Woodthorpe, who's the villain, in a sense. He's the one that gets the Frankenstein creature to do the killing, not the Baron. But it's also, because they're using some of Universal's concepts, there are burgomasters and there are like policemen in funny hats and everything. Then, in a way, sort of like, because Hammer have done so well by forging their own identity, making their own kinds of films, not being like anything else, but doing their own thing, and suddenly they're being like Universal. They're adopting some of Universal sort of like ideas and motifs and stuff, and it becomes less effective.
Yes, and I think it points to the fact that Hammer were at heart a commercial enterprise. These films made money, and ultimately the company would win the Queen's Award for Industry because they were so successful. And they did things which allowed them to make money. And
Quite right.
In the late 50s, that meant making Frankenstein movies which had nothing to do with Universal. That was what would allow them to succeed. In the 60s, that didn't necessarily have enough. That wasn't a limitation, and they could make more money by teaming up with Universal. So in a way, The Evil of Frankenstein, which is not directed by Terence Fisher, it's the only Peter Cushing Frankenstein film without Fisher. It's directed by Freddie Francis, who was a renowned British cinematographer, had shot films like The Innocents very beautifully, but with Hammer and Amicus Productions began a career as a director, and was probably the second most prolific Hammer director after Terence Fisher. Maybe, well, no, that's probably not true, but he certainly did.
Well, he was a very prolific horror film director.
Yes.
He did all the Amicus things.
Yes.
How many Hammer horror films made? I'm not quite sure.
He did one Dracula and one Frankenstein at least. So he's kind of regarded as the second fiddle to Terence Fisher, I think.
Yes.
Definitely. But I think as a result, The Evil of Frankenstein, as directed by Francis, feels more like a sequel to the Universal Frankensteins, even to the extent that there are things in, like, the creature played by Kiwi Kingston is strongly implied to be the original creature that Frankenstein created, not the one, therefore, played by Christopher Lee, but the one played by Karloff. Because he doesn't create a new creature in that movie, does he? He finds it frozen in a glacier.
Yeah, it's frozen, which I think happens to one of the Universal films.
Yes.
They find the creature frozen somewhere.
Son of Frankenstein, I think.
Yeah.
Although I've never seen it, so I could be completely wrong.
I have seen it a long time ago.
So it ends with a spectacular burning windmill, I think, in which Frankenstein is trapped, and there's a strong implication that he dies.
Yes.
Well,
there's a big. He's in his old castle.
Oh, right.
Which various people have stolen things from, apparently. And there's a great conflagration at the end, and the monster goes on the rampage and starts smashing up the equipment, and the place explodes. And Frankenstein's sort of like assistant, the young guy, says, "Oh, they got him Shandor Ellis says, "Oh, they got him in the end," or something like that. So yeah, it's assumed that he's dead, that he's killed.
And I think I privately, although The Evil of Frankenstein is a quite enjoyable film, but I like to pretend it doesn't exist, because to me the beginning of it doesn't relate to the earlier Cushing films, and the ending of it doesn't relate to the later ones, because he's not dead, obviously, in the later films. Although in the later films he has burned his hands.
Yes.
He can't use his hands in his experiments.
It's a perfectly entertaining film. It's an entertaining on its own terms. It's very enjoyable.
Yes.
Because there's too many talented people involved with it for it not to be. Duncan Lamont, the great Duncan Lamont, sort of plays the chief of police, and he's a Hammer regular in quite a lot of films, and it's always great to see him. So I enjoyed it, but it's not.
It was the first film I ever saw Peter Woodthorpe in, and I'm always pleased to see him in anything now, and he's really quite good as the evil hypnotist. He was, before Andy Serkis, let's not forget, he was considered the best ever Gollum, because he voiced Gollum not only in the Ralph Bakshi animated film, but also in the BBC radio series.
He also played Del Boy's dad.
Oh, right.
In Uncles and Horses, yeah. Very good.
Well, he's always great. He's wonderful as Max, the first pathologist in Inspector Morse, and these days the Morse prequel series Endeavour is being broadcast, and I really do appreciate the fact that they've got an actor to play young Max in it who does look like young Peter Woodthorpe and just seems like the same character.
Doesn't sound like him though. He hasn't got Peter Woodthorpe's rich voice, which is so distinctive.
He's kind of nasal, isn't he? As well, he's sort of rich and nasal. That's interesting. But So the following Frankenstein film after the evil Frankenstein brought back Terence Fisher, and it's Frankenstein Created Woman, which is
this
one
is an
of my
interesting one.
favourites, and such. Although not necessarily because it's good, it has a lot of great qualities to it.
I watched it again recently, and it was a lot better than I remembered it being. I thought I slightly dismissed it because Frankenstein doesn't make a creature.
Yeah.
In this, it's all about capturing the soul, which seems a very metaphysical sort of thing for such a rational, atheistic sort of character to be doing. Usually he's, bringing the dead back to life. So, whereas this is all about the soul, catching the soul, and
it's a way of.
I know you've got to
immortality.
keep doing different things to keep the.
Well, no, I think
stories.
a lot of people have accused Frankenstein Created Woman of being a Dracula script that was repurposed, and it was written not by Jimmy Sangster but by John Elder, who is
the prolific John Elder,
who is Anthony Hines.
Yes,
the pen name of Anthony Hines, who was the producer of whose real name is Anthony Hammer. I think that's right, isn't it? There's a lot of different false names going on around the Hammer family.
Yes,
and. The producers Michael Carreras and Anthony Hines both wrote scripts for the company under their pen names Henry Younger and John Elder. So John Elder wrote the fourth Frankenstein and the fourth Dracula, and both have kind of similar plots in which a revenge is initiated against three men.
Yes, I was just thinking it is very similar to Taste of Blood of Dracula.
Yes,
essentially. But these three, on its own terms, again, it works really well. You've got these three like Bullingdon boys, who are very rude because sort of like the creature in this film is a woman who's just disfigured. She's just sort of scarred and everything, and they're making fun of her. And her boyfriend, whose father, played by the great Duncan Lamont, again,
there he is,
gets executed. So he's sort of got that stigma. He sort of protects it. And there's this brilliant fight scene. I love this fight scene where they're in the cafe. And Hans, is it the sort of like the hero?
Yes.
He beats up the three sort of like toffee sort of public schoolboy types, and really gives them a damn good hiding, which they deserve. And it's a sort of it's that sort of like Hammer going for it and really doing a really physical sequence and having a proper fight, sort of thing. And then the three, it's a complicated story. The three guys, the three Bullingdon boys, stab the girl's father. Because they go back into the bar and he discovers them, so they kill him. Hans, the boyfriend, gets executed for the crime, and Baron Frankenstein somehow is able to transfer his soul into the body of the girl who's committed suicide.
Yes. And just for the hell of it, he corrects her disfigurement while doing that.
Yeah, it makes her a beautiful woman.
And as a result, you get Susan Denberg with the brain of... hang on.
Robert Morris.
Robert Morris. As a result, you get Susan Denberg with the brain of Robert Morris speaking with the voice of Monica van der Zyl, who's possibly the sexiest voice actress in the history of British
And
film.
one of the most prolific as
Yes.
well, because she can be heard in all sorts of Hammer films and James Bond films and probably lots of other films as well. So.
Well, I think you and I have talked about Nikki van der Zyl as she's known before, and the fact that she's... We just mentioned Eunice Gayson as in more than one Bond film, but Nikki van der Zyl is in more than one Bond film, playing more than one character. She romances Sean Connery twice as two different voices, coming out of Ursula Andress in one film, and out of Claudine Auger in another one, and then she appears as various minor characters as well. I think she's done incredible work. I have no idea what she looks like.
No idea what she looks like, but she has the most brilliant name. Nikki van der Zyl. How great is that name?
No, absolutely. So. And every time in the 60s and 70s films, you can kind of tell when someone's dubbed. Usually not because it's done badly, but because you can recognise the voice.
Because they use the same person all the time. There's a guy called Robert Rietti.
Yes.
Who, his voice is so familiar. He just dubs everybody. But he also, sort of like minor characters who've got a line to say, they'll use his voice. If there's a radio, they'll use his voice. It's the newsreader or something. It's just...
Well, I think if you watch the James Bond films and there's a character who requires some kind of European accent, and they need to dub him, it will probably be Robert Rietti or David de Keyser.
David de Keyser.
If it's an American character, they'll get Shane Rimmer. And if it's a woman, they'll get Nikki van der Zyl. And as a result, you can be watching any film from that period, and suddenly you may well hear this familiar voice, and it always cheers me up when it's Nicky van der Zyl, certainly. Now Frankenstein created woman, which is a horribly offensive title, punning on the Roger Vadim film, And God Created Woman.
Brigitte Bardot.
It's an entertaining, strange tale. It's not quite a horror film, almost. There's a kind of fairy tale quality to it.
Yeah, and again, the Baron is quite sympathetic.
Yes,
he's always portrayed as being obsessive and being sort of ruthless, but he doesn't kill anybody in this film. In fact, he tries to stop people being killed. He tries to save Hans at the trial.
Yeah,
he said he couldn't possibly have committed this. So he's actually sort of like, in a way, not the good guy, but he's sort of a sympathetic presence, and he doesn't die at the end.
No,
he just sort of walks off looking a bit wistful.
Well, at the end of the movie, we should say that once Hans's brain goes into Christina's body, it doesn't go well.
No.
There's an extraordinary scene. She carries Hans's head around in her hat box, and at one point she produces Hans's head from the box and speaks to it in Hans's voice for some reason, and then kills herself. And the last thing you see in the movie is she's going to throw herself into a torrent. And Frankenstein appears and says, no, you come with me, we can make this right. And she goes, I'm sorry, and throws herself off. So I kind of love the character development of that. He spends the whole film kind of trying to do the decent thing by various people. And it doesn't work out and everybody dies. So he just shakes his head and walks away. And I feel at that point he's going, right, I've had enough. Sod this trying to be decent man. And then we get Frankenstein must be destroyed.
My favourite.
Which has possibly the most memorable trailer tagline for a film, which is scientist, sadist, madman, murderer, search everywhere, leave no stone unturned, make no mistake, Frankenstein must be destroyed.
I love this film. Even the title is just so kind of brilliantly sort of unsubtle. I love it. I think this is my favourite of all the Frankenstein Hammer films, including The Curse of Frankenstein. I love this one the best. I just think it's got such pace. I think Frankenstein is back to being a really ruthless, horrible, evil villain in this.
And more so than in The Curse of Frankenstein, but possibly even more charismatic. And even funnier, he has some great one-liners gifted to him by the screenwriter Burt Batt, who I don't think wrote another film.
I don't think he did. I think he was like an assistant producer or something, wasn't he?
He was the assistant director on lots of British films like Zulu, for instance. I think, or am I thinking of Burt Bates? But he was certainly assistant director on lots of other Hammer films. I am thinking of Burt Bates, who edited Zulu. No, I don't think Burt Batt ever wrote another movie, although he assistant directed lots of other Hammer films. But I think it's a great, thrilling screenplay in which Frankenstein essentially blackmails a couple into helping him with his experiments in a very Dickensian kind of vision.
It seems it's more
Carl's
up to date, isn't it? It's not in the sort of like the castles and
no, it
seems like in streets and in a city, and everybody seems more up to date in a way,
and as photographed by Arthur Grant, all the streets kind of glisten with rain and things. It's shot at Elstree. We should say that by this point in the series, Hammer had moved into shooting in other London film studios because their own studio, Bray Studios, where they shot all their early stuff, which was basically a converted country house, had been sold by that point. So they'd gone into the conventional big movie studios, and some commentators say that their films have a noticeably different atmosphere as a result of that. But I think it definitely benefits Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. It really feels different. And even though it has a very familiar cast, Thorley Walters, who was in Frankenstein Created
It's a
Woman.
great cast, so almost everybody in it's famous. Thorley Walters, Freddie Jones, Maxine Audley, Jeffrey Baildon, Peter Copley,
Veronica Carlson,
lovely Veronica Carlson, a young Simon Ward, Windsor Davis pops up. It's Frank Middlemass. It's that's what Hammer did. They got all these great actors in.
Yeah,
these very accomplished actors to play sometimes fairly small parts, and it just gives it that sort of authenticity and that reality and that sort of.
There's real class to it, and the creature in it, or eventually Frankenstein creates a new creature who is Freddie Jones. But he's a successfully intelligent creature who remembers his former life, but his brain's been transplanted into a different body, and he realizes that he can never go back to his wife and things. And Jones brings a great deal of pathos.
Yes, it's. I think that's why I like this film so much, because the creature is actually quite sympathetic. Actually, a lot closer to the creature in the book, who is articulate and can sort of articulate his anguish and his sort of torment and all the pain he's feeling. And there's one scene where, because Freddie Jones has had another character's brain put in his head, and he goes to see the wife of the man whose brain he's got, Maxine Audley, and he has to hide behind a screen because he doesn't want her to see it. And it's really moving, because he knows that, his brain is in a different body, and it's, and there's a genuine note of pathos in this film which you don't get in the others.
Yes,
so much.
There's a violence and a viciousness to it.
It starts with Frankenstein cutting somebody's head off with a machete.
Yeah.
And it just keeps, which is brilliant.
But there's a cutting, not to pun on necessarily, but there's a cutting sense of humour to it. There's some great one-liners. There are some nasty moments, some of which aren't quite necessary, like the controversially inserted at the last minute rape scene.
Yes, that's the one thing that sort of it doesn't spoil it, but that scene is so unnecessary. And that the producers of this film said, right, we need more sex, so they put in a rape scene, which kind of suggests a certain lack of sensitivity,
And I think, I think it...
And it shouldn't be there. And it also, narratively, it shouldn't be there anyway, because there is this scene, and then nobody refers to this rape. Yes. Everybody behaves as if it hadn't happened, because it was filmed later on and then inserted. So it makes no narrative sense anyway. And also, the character Frankenstein wouldn't do that.
No.
He's sort of asexual in a way.
Well, I don't think he's asexual, because ever since the first film where he's having an affair with the servant girl...
But it's sort of that kind of aspect of the character has been lost by then.
Yeah.
It's just his whole life is about creating a monster. That's his obsession.
But I do think that there's quality to the scene in the sense that Veronica Carlson and Cushing get away with it and play it with some kind of... they retain their dignity as actors while the characters lose theirs.
Yes. I agree with that. I just the scene shouldn't be there.
Yes.
It shouldn't be, and it's unnecessary in every sense.
But apart from that, the film...
Apart from that, it's a bloody marvellous film.
It was directed by Terence Fisher, and I believe it was his joint favourite film that he made along with Dracula. And he really does bring an incredible pace to it.
It's so fast. And there's that great scene where they've buried a dead body in the garden, and then there's a burst water main. And the body's being uncovered. It's sort of like being revealed, and Veronica Carlson has to kind of drag it somewhere so it can't be seen. And it's done so brilliantly that you really get caught up in it, and it's sort of...
A few years... When I first saw this film, I was at uni. And I invited a friend of mine around for a lunchtime double bill of Frankenstein Created Woman and Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. And it was a great afternoon. And he said at the end, that he could see that Hammer films had been stereotyped and misremembered in a lot of ways. And to a certain degree, they were just really professionally entertaining films. And you can see that in those two films because they're so different and yet made out of the same personnel and the same inspirations. But you've got the fairy tale oddness of Frankenstein Created Woman and then the vicious black comedy of Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed right next to each other. And it's a thrilling transition between the two, and they're both so strong. And I do particularly love Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. I think the first film is still my favourite because it's such a pure distillation of the story, but Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed is a great film. And then we only have two more films to mention.
Yeah.
And the first one is a film I haven't seen. In 1970, there was a feeling that Cushing, there was a feeling in the Hammer head offices, I guess, that Cushing was no longer young enough to hold the youth audience, and they wanted a sexier, younger Frankenstein.
Nonsense.
So they decided, I agree, so they decided to reboot it, in modern parlance, the series, with a remake of The Curse of Frankenstein, which was written and directed by the screenwriter of the original, Jimmy Sangster, and stars an actor who Hammer hoped would be the new Peter Cushing, Ralph Bates. I've never seen this film, but suffice it to say that 3 years later, Hammer just made another Peter Cushing film and acted like the remake, which is called The Horror of Frankenstein, never happened. Anything to add?
I have seen this film, and it's bad. It's very bad. And what's so sad about it is they've just made Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. They've just made this brilliant film. Right, they've got it now. They know how to make a Frankenstein film. They know how to characterise Frankenstein, make him really nasty and really vicious and really horrible, really the villain, surround him with a great cast. Terence Fisher's on form. It's a great script. In a way, it's like Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed is equivalent of Dracula Prince of Darkness, which kind of jump-started the Dracula sort of thing. It's brilliant. It's so fast and so pacey and so enjoyable and entertaining. And then they go completely the wrong direction and say, no, we won't capitalise on what we did with Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. Make some kind of we will make a send-up, we'll do a parody, a comedy. And that in itself is not a bad idea, making a comedy. It's just a very bad comedy. It's not funny at all. It's kind of like adolescent humour. The only good thing about it is Dennis Price as a sort of posh gravedigger who doesn't actually do any digging. He gets his wife to dig the graves and everything. And Dennis Price is just being Dennis Price and doing his thing. And that's all. The rest of it is just... It's one of the jokes is Frankenstein's got a hand in a jar and he's trying to bring it back to life. And when he does, the hand makes a V sign. And that's the level of the humour in the film.
Apparently they shot 2 versions of that for different markets. For the American market, they shot one where he does a single finger.
It's not. It wouldn't be very funny either way. It's...
all I will say if anybody's interested in this film, it is on the Horror Channel.
Yeah, it is on the Horror Channel, yeah.
And there's an interesting video on YouTube. There's a channel called Trailers from Hell, which is the channel created by the film director Joe Dante, whose work we know and love, and who Christopher Lee, for instance, worked with a couple of times. Where basically people sit down and watch trailers of films that they either admire or worked on and just talk about the film. And it's actually got the trailer of Horror of Frankenstein introduced by Brian Trenchard-Smith, the Australian film editor who actually edited the trailer and also graphic designed the trailer, and talking about how he actually thought it was not too bad an approach. It's only 2 minutes long, so if you want an alternative viewpoint on the Horror of Frankenstein, go there. So then, 3 years later, we have the last Frankenstein film and the last Terence Fisher film, which is Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. The only survivor from the Horror of Frankenstein fiasco is the fact that the monster is played by the same actor in both films, which is Dave Prowse of Darth Vader fame.
Yes, indeed.
The film itself is an entertaining kind of misfire, I guess. I mainly remember the fact that a lot of emphasis is actually placed on Peter Cushing's assistant in it, because he's played by Shane Bryant, another Australian who was another actor that Hammer was hoping would become a star, but didn't. He made 2 or 3 Hammer films in the mid-70s. And Cushing in an odd wig is in an insane asylum, and with the collaboration of the people running the asylum, is continuing his experiments on other patients in the asylum, and creates a hulking Dave Prowse shaped beast. And that's all I can really remember, apart from the fact that Madeline Smith is in it, another Bond girl co-opted in...
Using her own voice. It is Madeline Smith's voice. She's mute for most of it, but she does speak at the end, and it is her voice. Nikki Van der Zyl was done a hell of a job there.
Oh, damn.
The thing about this film, I watched it again recently, and it just all looks a bit cheap and a bit tatty by now. Hammer, the budgets are lower, perhaps some of the people that worked on the earlier films are not working on it anymore. They haven't got those wonderful Bernard Robinson sets. The production values are not so high, and it all looks a bit shabby. And the fact that it's set in a lunatic asylum kind of adds to that, adds to the sort of like the griminess of it, and sort of like the shabbiness of it. It's not a very attractive location for a film, and also the kind of the inmates of the asylum are just treated as sort of grotesques who come on and just holler and howl, and when at various points, and I don't know, it's just a kind of it's just a kind of, I don't know, it is, again, it's like, it's grim, it's sort of, it's an unengaging film, I think. It's like everybody's sort of going through the motions, but in reduced circumstances. Bernard Lee's in it, but he doesn't even speak. He's in one scene. And it's like, well, I suppose Hammer at this point, Hammer's sort of coming to the end of the line now. The Exorcist has come out, Night of the Living Dead's come out. That sort of period, romantic, gothic horror film that Hammer made is sort of going out of fashion now. So they're trying to find ways of sort of competing with that, but they can't compete with that sort of thing. And there's one scene where Frankenstein he's killed a professor, played by Charles Lloyd Pack, another Hammer regular, Trigger's dad, for those. And he's sort of like, he's cut the top of his head off and he's removing his brain to put in a jar. And it's a very long, protracted scene of Peter Cushing and Shane Bryant very, very slowly taking this brain out of the head and putting it into a jar somewhere. And it's like, it's not scary, it's not shocking, it's just gross, it's just unpleasant. It's almost like it's just saying, right, you want gore, here's gore. Just point the camera at it and that's it. If that's what people want, we'll give them that. And there's an unpleasantness about it, a kind of seediness about it, that the director of the asylum, played by John Stratton, he's a lascivious, sort of horrible person, and he's raped his own daughter.
Oh, God.
Again, it's rape just as sort of titillation kind of thing. And there's that sort of unpleasantness.
Incestuous rape as well. That's not something you should drop into a film lightly, really.
No. And of course, they don't make anything of that. It's just there for like shock effect. Right. And I don't know, it just...
I seem to remember the whole film has a sense of the dying fall of Hammer. And there is a nice quality to that, in that you get to sort of... You see closing bows from people like Patrick Troughton and Bernard Lee and Cushing, all looking a bit long in the tooth. It's good that they're there. And also it's the final time that James Bernard... I think that James Bernard had a couple of scores. But Terence Fisher, James Bernard, they're all there. It's another John Elder script, I think.
They're all there. All the kind of the people who've done such great stuff before. But
it's very much an insipid kind of final bound.
It lacks the grandeur of the early. It lacks the scale. It lacks the vigor.
It's one of those things where you're kind of glad it exists, but you just wish it was good.
You just kind of feel everybody's slightly demeaning for everybody. That they're going through the motions again, but on a lower budget and just to a smaller audience. No, I don't dislike it because again, there's too many talented people involved in the making of it for it to be sort of too bad. But it's something rather sad about it, that everything's just looks so diminished, and kind of.
I agree. It's going out with a whimper, not a bang, to coin a cliche. On that note, my friend, we're coming to the end of our allotted time. So...
we are.
Absolutely we are. It's been an absolute pleasure to discuss these films.
We love these films, and we hope, that's why we're doing this. We want to communicate this sort of... this passion, this enthusiasm we feel for these films that all these talented people made 40, 50 years ago.